Hi, guys. Now, before I start, I want to thank Mr. Howard, Mr. Machado, Mr. Chicatello, Mr. Almeida, and everybody else who helped put together this graduation. And thank you, Dr. Thomas Lopez, teachers, parents, trustees, friends, family, and fellow graduates. I think we can all agree on the fact that these are strange times we're living in. Times no one has ever experienced, and the one thing we need the most seems impossible to obtain. A feeling of togetherness, a way to feel and know that we are all in this together, despite being locked in our houses. These are, however, the circumstances in which this class excels. We don't just admit defeat and say that we won't be able to be together. We didn't even let this pandemic get between us and our connections to each other. This is what makes Gordon special, and this is what makes the class of 2020 special. Near the end of my 5th grade, my plan was to go to Nathan Bishop Middle School in Providence, and then on to Classical. It was my mom who first realized that Bishop might not be the best fit for me, and thought that I might do better somewhere different. I visited Gordon and was blown away. All the space we had to run outside, the way that people welcomed me into their school as if it was their home, the warmth and how genuinely happy they were was truly astonishing. Gordon is a school built for children. It's a place that feels like a second home to us. From the warm glow cascading through the skylight and the well, to the Nelson Fieldhouse where I know every single one of us has cheered on our favorite team. Even though I had a great first impression, I was still really nervous when I came back in the fall of 6th grade. I walked in through the front entrance and down to Miss Reedon's room in middle school. I passed by kids saying hi to friends they hadn't seen since the spring, the teachers smiling at all of them, and finally I reached the stairs leading down to my 6th grade advisor. I didn't think that anyone would have remembered me from when I visited. I didn't think of myself as particularly memorable. I looked around at my new classmates, and one pair of eyes found mine, and I knew then this would be different than what I expected. Andrew Song, one of my best friends to this day, looked up and said, "Hey, it's Edward." And everyone started to look up, and one by one started to recognize me and say hello. It was this moment that I started to believe that Gordon was the kind of place that would change my life. Just the feeling of being known and respected, knowing that you'll never meet a stranger at the Gordon School. That's the feeling and the kind of community that Gordon creates and nurtures, and that's what sets it apart from everyone else. The class of 2020 is exceptional because we do not fear stepping up and filling shoes more commonly filled by people who are much older. Our talent, experience, and love of life let us become larger than life and larger than anyone expects us to be. In 7th grade, there was a perfect example of this stepping up. The musical this year was The Wizards, yeah, there were 2 of them, of Oz. Lead roles are most commonly filled by 8th graders, but one 7th grader took on the mantle of the Wicked Witch for herself and stole the show. She gave a performance that we all had incredibly high expectations of, but she blew us away. Josie Harrison accepted the challenge with grace and elegance and demonstrated to the entire Gordon community that a member of the class of 2020 does not shy away from opportunity. We seize these opportunities and we thrust ourselves into the spotlight, whether it's in the classroom, on Engel Field, or in the Wales Theater. These times are strange ones, extraordinary ones, as we can clearly see looking at each other through our car windows. But isn't that when the class of 2020 thrives? When we see an injustice or people in need, isn't that when this class steps up as the leaders of the world? For instance, in 6th grade, the story you knew was going to be told about the trip to New York City and the United Nations. We woke up at 4 in the morning and drove to school ready to go to the UN to visit the place we've been studying for so long. But when the bus driver didn't show up and we found out that we woke up for so early for what felt like no reason, there were tears, yes, there was plenty of anger, and we could have admitted defeat at that moment. But we didn't. We hopped on a school bus and drove to somewhere infinitely more beautiful, cleaner, and nicer, downtown Boston. We ended up having such an amazing time on that trip. We went to the Boston Museum of Science. We had Shake Shack right by Boston Harbor, and we really made the most of that experience. That trip showed the perseverance of this class, the talent we have of constantly looking on the bright side, looking for ways to make our experiences and our lives the best that they can be. When I first came here, I was blown away by how open and connected this grade was. Time and time again, we show how much we hold each other above everything else. Now, that's not to say we never get in fights or get mad at each other, because that would just be a lie. But at the end of the day, what matters to us is each other. We prioritize having fun and having a good time over, well, pretty much everything else sometimes, and that can have good and bad effects. For example, during the basketball tournament this year, when the girls' team faced Wheeler, I watched this game with my dad, and he pointed out something out about the game. We were ahead by something like 10 points at a certain point in the game, with the Gordon strategy of constant rotation so everybody has equal playing time. Wheeler crept up behind and started to score more and more, and as the game got closer, the girls never wavered. They kept rotating people in and out so everyone could have a good time and play. Wheeler eventually caught up and ended winning the game by 1 point. My dad mentioned afterwards that it seemed like the Wheeler team hadn't made many substitutions during the game, even though there were plenty of players left on their bench. But everyone on Gordon's team had played the whole game. Did this cost them the game? Maybe it did. But we saw what really mattered to them. It was working as a team, cheering on their friends, and at the end of the day, being able to have a great time with the people that they love. Before I came to Gordon, I was at a place that was incredibly different. I was one of few white kids in a class of almost 60. I didn't know then how to talk about race or privilege, or even how to be aware of who was around me in that sense. Then, when I came to Gordon, I learned so much more. I had talked with my family about things like this a bit, about racism and the history of our country. But being at Gordon, I learned and experienced so much about how to talk about race and racism and how to be aware of privilege. At Gordon, I found an interest in social justice and trying to better the world and better understand my place as a white guy. When we went to see the movie about Bryan Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative a few months ago, I found something that I knew I wanted to pursue. When we got back from the movie, I decided to read the book Just Mercy about the same topic and began researching the criminal justice system and how to help those in need. If it wasn't for Gordon, I never would have found this interest in the law, and I believe that without Gordon and this class of 2020, I would never have found this thing that I deeply care about. I'm privileged. I'm a white male born and raised on the east side of Providence. My family has never really had to worry about money, and I get to go to private school. I can't pretend to know how people today who are not like me are feeling. I can't know what it's like to be African American. I can't pretend to know what it feels like to be unjustly treated by law enforcement. I can't tell you that I know what it's like to have a target painted on my back simply because of the color of my skin. But what I can tell you, everyone here today on Englefield or watching this online, is that always, despite the odds, despite what anyone might say or believe, I and the rest of the class of 2020 will stand up for what's right. We will lift up others, lift up ourselves, and most of all, we will know that each and every one of us has the other's back. This class has changed my life, and it will continue to do so for the rest of it. I love you guys.